So, Deputy Speaker, can I first of all pay tribute to all those in my own constituency of North Somerset who have helped our community through the pandemic. The medical and emergency staff, other key workers, our volunteers and the neighbours who have made all the difference. I want to say a few words about how I believe we can ensure public confidence in our policy remains high. But first I want to say just a few things about the current lockdown. And I would begin by reinforcing my honourable friend the Minister's point that when we leave the national lockdown on the 2nd December, we're not going to a national free-for-all in the run-up to Christmas. And ministers must make it very clear that we're transitioning back to a regional tiered system because over-optimism, just as it would be if people believe that a vaccine coming means they don't have to obey the rules, would be very dangerous for public health. But if we're going to move successfully back to the tiered system, we have to deal with some of the illogical rules that still exist despite the best efforts of ministers. And it's not frivolous, it's actually important about getting people to conform to the restrictions that are in place. For example, we do want people to play sport, but do we really believe that a spaced round of golf is more dangerous to public health than people attending a supermarket? When it comes to religious observation, for example, is it credible that people who go to church for private worship, who are properly spaced, are a greater danger than the same number with the same spacing who take part in a service? These are issues that are important to a lot of people out there, and the government needs to deal with some of these illogicalities if we're to deal with the conformity. Now, there is something that ministers can do immediately, and that's about the free testing for families of key workers. Now, I've got a constituent who is a key worker who's been sent home because her son has also been sent home from school to isolate. She cannot go back to work until her son has a negative test, but he doesn't qualify for free testing. In other words, she must pay to get her son tested before she can go back to a key occupation. Now, that cannot be the right way to treat our key workers, and I would urge the Minister to look as quickly as possible in how we deal with these very key members of our society. And can I also ask him, through the Treasury, to look again at those who were remunerated through dividends? Many of these people are hard-working, decent, not tax dodgers, who were able to get by on for a short period of time, but as the lockdown goes on, it's becoming impossible for them and they're facing absolute undue hardship, and I would urge the government to look again at them. But my main comments, Mr Deputy Speaker, are relating to what in medicine our great maxim would have been, which was do no harm. And that means that the patient must not be worse off from the cure than they were from the original disease. And this is a dilemma facing all governments. How do you protect public health while ensuring economic viability upon which the funding for public services is generated? And so far, the public remains very supportive of the government's position, but that cannot be guaranteed. And recent controversies over the use of data has made it more difficult for the government simply to say it is following the science. And I think there is growing resistance to the concept of lockdowns, sadly. I think that is inevitable as economic concerns rise to the fore. I think it is utterly irrational to say you are against all lockdowns, because that needs to be a decision taken on the basis of the evidence at the time. But I think we need to understand the anxieties and the frustrations if the government wants to keep its options open and retain credibility with the public. So how can Parliament play its part in that process? Well, COVID-19 is not just a health issue, it's an economic issue. It affects welfare and employment and our personal and social well-being. And of course, there is no such thing actually as the science. There is a range of scientific views where we need to understand what that range is and the weight given to the respective parts of that if we are to have faith in the outcome of the judgments that have been made. Our current select committees, Mr Deputy Speaker, are very good at looking at departmental functions and policy, but they're very vertical and they don't look across the whole of government. In 2012, after the banking scandal, David Cameron set up the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards. It was a full parliamentary committee of inquiry involving both houses. I believe we need the same now. Senior, but temporary, cross-party and with both houses. Of course, the reaction is likely to be from the front bench, no more scrutiny. I've been there, done that, I've been on the front bench, and know all those arguments are, but I think it would be a mistake and something the government would come to regret, because such a commission would help show that across the whole of government, advice and data has been properly scrutinised. It's an opportunity to reinforce public confidence as we face the COVID pandemic into 2021. And finally, there's another reason why we should have such a setup. This will not be the last pandemic we face. In the era of globalisation, when, for example, we have 700,000 people in normal times in the air at any one time, we will face further pandemics. And although this has been a tragedy for every single case, it has not been a particularly lethal pandemic by historic standards. We need to set up the structures that we will need to deal with future pandemics. We need internationally to work out what are the protocols that we will put in place when we get the emergence of new viruses. What are the metrics we will use to measure that? Because what we cannot have is the disorganised and shambolic international response that we have had globally to this particular pandemic. And at home, we need transparency, with all the evidence scrutinised, if we are to maintain public confidence and see off the political opportunists and the conspiracy theorists. And we need that transparency and we need that scrutiny in this House, and we need it urgently.